Thank you. So most of you here All right, most of you here probably know, who's done any neuroimaging analysis, probably know what a BIDS app is. If you don't know what a BIDS app is, you probably at least know of some of the major BIDS apps that have been developed, fMRI Prep or MRI QC. And what these all have in common is two main things. First, there's a common interface. So these are usually CLI or command line interface apps. And you'll have the three main arguments: input directory, output directory, and analysis level. But the main and more powerful thing is that they all work on BIDS datasets. So BIDS is a specification that tells you how to name your files so that they can be read by humans and by machines. And so an app like fMRI Prep is able to read the dataset, and it's able to find all the T1 weighted scans by looking at the suffix, and it's able to find all of the fMRI scans by looking at the suffix, and it can pull all those and run its analysis on them. Now, the big apps that you've heard of tend to be the first app you'll run on your data. These are the initial pre-processing steps. But for any real-world analysis, this is only the first step. To actually get to the publication, you'll have to do some other number of steps on your data. And the nature of these analyses is going to vary widely depending on the questions that you're asking. And you're not going to have standardized apps to do these steps. You'll be developing that code by yourself, most likely. So in my lab, the Ali Khan lab that I'm part of, we like to develop small BIDS apps to do these steps as well. We not only get the advantage of the BIDS app, so we have that common interface that makes it easy to share with others in and without our lab. But by keeping them small and modular, it makes them easier to maintain. You can tweak them easier if you have to modify it for your own analysis. And keeping them modular makes it easier to mix and match. So to make all of these modular small apps, we need a good, efficient way of making BIDS apps. And that's where Snakebids comes in. Snakebids is a library or a framework that helps you build BIDS apps. And it does this by solving three main problems you'll encounter if you're trying to do this from scratch. The first is a boilerplate problem. So all BIDS apps are going to have the same basic command line interface with the three main arguments and some housekeeping arguments. But there's also tasks that every single BIDS app will have to do: indexing the data sets, finding the inputs that you're looking for, and then making them available to the code that will actually do the work. So Snakebids allows you to do a lot of this grunt boilerplate work in just a few lines of code. The second problem relates to how you select inputs, and I'm going to explain this problem with an example. So let's take an example problem. Let's say for our secondary analysis, we want to project data from a nifty file. From the gray matter of a nifty file, we want to project it onto the cortical surface so we can do a surface-based analysis. So to do this type of workflow, you're going to need four basic types of files. You'll need the peel and the white matter surfaces, and those are going to define the limits of the gray matter. You're going to need the mid-thickness surface, and that's what we'll actually project the data onto. And finally, you'll need the data itself. And immediately we run into a problem because we don't know offhand what type of data you need. You can project any type of data onto the cortical surface so long as it's in a nifty file. And so we have this ill-posed problem for our app where the data could be from any modality. It could have a file type with any variety of entities. But we also have a problem with our surfaces. So for instance, even though the surface files themselves are fairly standardized, we don't know which space you want. So you might have multiple spaces, and we don't know which one you want to use. You may have surfaces coming from multiple pipelines. We don't know which one you want to use. And in general, there's many, many different types of derivatives. People are coming up with new derivatives all the time, and the naming is not very standardized. So I think there's about 25 current proposals to extend the BIDS specification to encompass more of these derivatives. But these take a long time to ratify, and in the meantime, people are busy naming their file something, and so we need a way of handling this heterogeneity. So Snakebids solved this problem with this concept of a BIDS component. A BIDS component is a single slice of your data set that represents one type of data or one type of file. So for instance, the peel surface, that would be an example of a component. And we define a component with two main things. The first is a filter. So to define our peel components for our little app here, we might have these four different filters. So it'll have a surface.gifty extension, it'll have a peel suffix, and then we might narrow down the space to the FSLR space. And that will leave us with these two files here because they match all the filters. And in the real world, we'll have that for several subjects and several sessions and hemispheres. But we still have a whole bunch of files here. We have 8 different files. So to condense these even further, we have this concept of a wildcard. So a wildcard is a variable portion of our path. So all of these paths are exactly the same except for the subject, session, and hemisphere. So we can define these as our wildcards. And that lets us finally condense the path down to this template, where we have these brace-wrapped placeholders that represent our wildcards, and those will be filled in with data for each path. So we're left with this template, and then we have a table, and the table has all of the values that will fill in that template and let us reconstitute our path. So Snakebids has this bids component as a object with an API that's available in it to help you manipulate these objects. And just to give one more example of how powerful this is, let's look at those pesky data files that I mentioned earlier. So we know that they have a nifty extension, so we could define that by default. But we're still left with all of these different files, and the app does not know in advance what files it will be. So this is where the user is able to use the command line interface to further specify this. So any Snakebids app will, for free, give you these filter keywords. So our component is called data, so we have the filter data flag. And the user could, for instance, filter by suffix equals MDP, so this would be a diffusion-weighted derivative file. And we're still left with 4 files here, so we have actually 2 options now. The user would have 2 options to handle this. One, they could add a second filter to their command line call, so just filter description equals param1. But they could also add an additional wildcard, so you could use this wildcards component name flag, and that would turn all of these descriptions into wildcards, and now the app could run on every single type of parameter at the same time. And Snakebids allows you to make the app so that the app doesn't need to know which approach the user will take. It can work the same way in both instances. And the last main point is integration with workflow frameworks. So we developed Snakebids around SnakeMake primarily. SnakeMake is the workflow manager that we use in our lab. But really, what Snakebids is doing here is it's acting as a communicator between the BIDS app front end that the user interacts with and the SnakeMake back end, which is actually doing the work. And in principle, this communication can be agnostic. So right now, it really is meant to work with SnakeMake, but we're working hard to try to make it more agnostic so that you could plug in other backends. And so you're not limited to using SnakeMake. You could, for instance, just write plain Python code or use another workflow manager. Nevertheless, Snakebids is a mature app that has been used in published workflows. So these are a couple examples of workflows that have been published that use Snakebids. But yeah, we have lots of room for future development. So making it more agnostic is an immediate goal, and I have a little example app that I can chat about that does not use SnakeMake. And there's some other goodies that we want to explore in the future. Because we have this sort of automatically configured BIDS app, that should enable us to do things like automated integration testing, which just by configuring the app, you'll get that type of integration testing for free, which would be really powerful for developers. Anybody who wants to talk with me more about this, I have a poster on Wednesday and Thursday in the repositories there. I want to thank all the GitHub contributors as well who make this possible. And I want to thank you all for listening.
Could Snakebids also handle non-BIDS data with the wildcard system?
Yeah, definitely. So it definitely is currently possible. It's a little bit of an escape hatch right now, so it's maybe not the most user-friendly, but what we do have is, if I can go back in my slides. So these filter and wildcards data flags that we have here, we have another one. I think it's called path template data. I don't use it very often, so I don't remember the name offhand, but I think it's path templates or something like that. And that would allow the user to put in their own path template, and they would just put actually, I think they would put the brace wrapped wildcards. Anyways, it definitely is possible. And because it uses those wildcards, you can put those in potentially any path. The outputs will always be BIDS. So it is designed to produce BIDS outputs, but in principle, any inputs can be used.
We have another one. Where and how can I submit a proposal for a new BIDS specification?
That one is beyond my pay grade. I'm not on the BIDS ratification, but I think that if you go into the BIDS specification website, they have a BIDS proposals page there, and you can follow the links to figure that one out.
And does the Snakebids support non-MRI data types too?
Yeah, so Snakebids will do for sure anything that's in the BIDS spec, and I think BIDS includes microscopy, physiology data. And then, yeah, especially with custom paths, you can, in principle, do anything. It's really just turning those, the main thing that it does is it turns those paths into that sort of tabular structure. So there's really nothing neuroimaging specific about that beyond the fact that neuroimaging happens to use BIDS. So it works well for this type of data.
Do we have any more questions from the audience? If not, we thank you, Peter.
Thanks.